What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today's reaction video is going to be New York City versus London City comparison. Now, although I've never actually lived in London, I am from England. I have been there multiple times. I get the history. I understand what London's all about, and I have my own opinions on it, being English. Now, New York, I've only been there once, but obviously you form a little bit of an opinion. I don't know all the facts, and this video is going to be super interesting to give me a comparison and understand the differences, which, to be honest with you, I don't really know what route it's going to go, and I don't know if it's going to compare expense of living or how big it is, or certainly, you know what I mean? So I don't really know how it's going to compare it, how happy people are living in each city, which people would prefer to live in. I don't know. Let's get straight into it and find out, guys. Hit that like button. I would seriously appreciate that. Hit that subscribe button as well, you absolute legends. And let's see the New York City versus London City comparison.
Let's move on to the main part of our video. According to Travel and Leisure magazine, the best city in the world right now you could visit is San Miguel de Allende in Mexico, followed by Charleston in the USA, followed by Chiang Mai in Thailand.
Oh, wow. I would have never have picked them three out. Maybe Charleston. I ever heard good things about Charleston. But the other two, wow, what a surprising list. I would have never have picked
These
them.
three places, however, don't even get on the top 20 places to actually live in
Okay.
this year's Quality of Living Index, a yearly list compiled by HR firm Mercer. Apparently, if you want to live the good life, you should move to Vienna, Austria, Zurich, Switzerland, or Auckland, New Zealand. The
Oh,
top
wow.
20 list doesn't include any cities from the UK or the USA, two countries that have arguably been the two heavyweights in the last century regarding power and wealth.
Wow, there you go. With the whole London New York thing, I can understand why living there wouldn't be on the top 20 list, just because they're very touristy places, very busy places, and it's not everyone's cup of tea, if that makes sense. I can understand that, but I'm surprised not one city from America, I almost said from New York there, from America made it onto that list, and maybe even a couple cities in England potentially could have made it on. I'm a little bit surprised about that, but fair play, it isn't. Some beautiful places in Switzerland, like we said before, and yeah, fair play. Let's see what this comparator's about. Obviously, no one wants to live there. Let's see if people want to visit, which I imagine they do.
These two countries, however, contain cities that attract millions of overseas visitors every year. Today, we are going to compare them in this episode of the infographic show, New York City versus London. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell button so that you can be part of our notification squad.
Do it
The
here,
cities
guys.
are two of the most visited places in the entire world. In 2016, though, the most visited city in the world by international travelers was Thailand's capital, Bangkok.
Oh, wow.
21.47 million people visited Bangkok that year. In second place was London with 19.88 million visitors, and in
Okay.
third place was Paris with 18.03 million visitors. The most visited US city was New York City, and that was in fifth place with 12.75 million visitors. Dubai
Okay.
was in fourth. In the last 5 years, Bangkok held the first position 3 times and London twice. In our comparison, we might thereby deduce that London is more visitable than New York City.
Oh, I don't know if you can say that, you know. Again, Bangkok for me, I would have never have guessed that would have been in the top 3, never mind top in the past 3 out of the 5 years. Maybe that's just how out of touch I am with it. I've never really thought about visiting Bangkok, to be honest with you. I understand a lot of people do, and it's a beautiful place, but I'd never thought about it personally, so that's a bit of a surprise. But on the London is more visitable, I think you've kind of got to look at who's visiting your country. From the US, you get a lot of people from the UK. But from the UK, you get shitloads of people. From the US, the US has a much bigger population. I know, I think it's 60% don't have passports, but still at 40% is still an incredible amount of people visiting the UK, whereas we're not sending as many over. And then you got the Europeans, or the rest of the world will just say, because it's not just for Europeans, who probably are split between going. So the main difference is probably bigger countries out there visiting UK, but we don't visit as much, even though we want to. Again, maybe it doesn't fill up all of them, but you know what I mean? US is a lot bigger. Talking about them to not really the other countries as much, I think that makes sense. The fact that more people coming from the US to the UK than UK to the US. I know it's not that simple, but let me know in your comments. I think that is the main thing, not that it's more visitable. That would be my guess anyway.
Let's find out why. First, we will take a look at the two cities' abridged history. We'll start with London as it's the elder. The city of London is old, but nowhere near as old as some cities in the Middle East, China, or other parts of Europe. You'll know from our show on the British and Roman empires that Britain was invaded by the Romans in 43 AD. They established the city of Londinium that at the time was about the size of a small village in England right now. When the Romans left Londinium, it was pretty much a ghost town, and for hundreds of years it remained so. Even the invading Vikings didn't didn't do much with it, and it wasn't until the Normans invaded from France and subjugated the country that London became a powerful city. William the Conqueror made London the Norman stronghold, building the famous Tower of London. The Normans would be the last people to this day to successfully invade England. In medieval times, London grew in power and wealth, but that also included the spread of poverty, corruption, and greed among the upper echelons of society, and bouts of population-denuding plagues. It wasn't until 1850 that London became the largest city in the world in terms of population. Some sources say it was as early as 1825, though most scholars agree that London was the most populated city until the 1920s. Another city then took over.
Well, there you go. A little bit of a crash course, very short, on London's history. Some things in there which I knew most of them, but you wouldn't know all of them. I didn't know the exact dates of like when we were the most populated country and stuff like that. Never knew that. So I've learned a little bit, and let's go on to New York's history. Obviously not as much history, but still a fantastic place.
Over right up until the 60s, and that was the city of New York. Long before New York City had high-rise buildings, it was the stomping ground of Algonquin natives who hunted and fished where people now trade stocks and eat pastrami sandwiches.
Wow.
It wasn't until 1624 that European settlers would start a community in the city when families of the Dutch West India Company made a home of Nutten Island. That's now known as Governor's Island and is between Manhattan and Brooklyn. Being Dutch, they called this place New Amsterdam. Some historians say that the Dutch bought the area from the natives for a few trinkets. The peace between the natives and the Euro expansionists didn't last, and the trouble ended with a lot more native casualties than Dutch casualties. New Amsterdam soon covered much of what we regard as New York City today, but the imperialistic Brits, guided by London prospectors, would soon burst the Dutch bubble. On August 26, 1664, 4 British frigates sailed to New Amsterdam and in a bloodless coup took control and renamed it New York after the Duke of York, not the city of York, in the north of England.
Oh wow, well there you go. That's something I didn't know. I'm learning something new here. I know for you guys all as well, but it was called New Amsterdam before New York. Now I know a lot of cities in America are named after English, well, the Duke of York this time, but a lot of cities in England as well. And I just didn't realise we renamed it. And a bit of history for me there, pretty awesome. The fact that you said bloodless as well, that's awesome. No one died. And they took control. You didn't have to have anyone die. Finally, a battle without anyone dying. That's absolutely awesome. But wow, again, learning something new.
At that time, the city had about 1,500 Europeans and 375 Africans, most of whom were slaves. It remained that way for over 100 years, and even when American independence was on the cards, New York City was a stronghold for British loyalists.
Oh wow.
In 1783, the British were forced out, and in 1789, it became the first national capital of the US. Only in 1790 did the capital become Washington, D.C. Like London, the growing city had its fair share of growing pains, including great fires and huge loss of life due to yellow fever and cholera. Nonetheless, by 1850, the population was more than 550,000, and New York City had become a center of the world. So now we come to the present day. The population of London right now is thought to be about 8.7 million. This has spiked lately due to the arrival of ethnic minorities that make up about 44% of the city's population. London covers an area of 607 square miles, making it the biggest city in Europe. New York City has a population of 8.538 million, and it is mixed in terms of ethnicity. About 44% of residents are white Caucasian, 27% Hispanic, 25% Black or African American, with a much smaller mix of other ethnicities. The city covers 304 square miles and is the biggest city in the USA, though considerably smaller than London. But with almost equal populations, this means New Yorkers have far less space.
Yeah, far less space, man. And I've never really thought about the size, to be honest with you. When I went to New York, obviously I was blown away by all the high-rise, the beautiful architecture and stuff like that. But that's how you cram so many people into a smaller space, I guess. It's pretty much half of London in the same population. That is pretty mental. But like you said, we've got nowhere near as many high-rises. We've got a few high-rises, but nowhere near as many. And in the half of space, you guys pull out all the stops, get as many people in there as possible. And it is a very, very busy city. And again, I didn't really think about it. When I was in New York, people everywhere. In London, yes, there's people everywhere, but it don't feel like there's as many. And I never really thought about the populations before, but I guess because it's the same amount of people in a smaller place, you just feel like there's so much more people, which again, I've never really thought before, but I get putting into perspective, you're learning like, okay, that's why we've got so many high-rise. And yeah, let's see what other differences we got.
So what about the standard of living in these cities? They are both pivotal cities regarding the financial sector, though one website claims that London's financial sector is slightly bigger with 340,000 employees to New York's 322,000. As of March 2017, the Global Financial Centers Index puts London at the center of the world, with New York hot on its heels in the number 2 spot.
I would have guessed it would have picked New York there. I know that's 2017. COVID may have affected some things, but let me know what it is now. My guess would be that New York has overtaken, but I genuinely do not know. So let me know, please.
New York has more billionaires, with 103 in 2017, according to Forbes, while London only has 72. London is said to have better job growth, though, over the last decade. For the average Joe among us, how is life in these cities? Again, it depends on which source you read. The latest cost of living index by Expatizen puts New York as the 5th most expensive city to live in the world, and London in 12th, with food and housing in New York being more expensive, but clothes and transportation being cheaper. The Guardian reports that after Brexit, London got a lot cheaper, stating that the city has recently arrived at a newfound bargain basement status.
New York must be so expensive, because all I think about London when I think about potentially buying property or something like that, I mean, it is way too expensive, man. Wow. The 12th most expensive city compared to the 5th. That is incredible. New York must be so expensive, man, because London it's not cheap, I'll tell you that. It is not cheap one bit.
In fact, according to the website Numbeo, that compares cost of prices around the world, the cities are fairly equal in terms of eating, going out, shopping, but just a bit more in New York. Renting in London is cheaper than New York if you're not renting high-end apartments, but actually buying a place is much more expensive in London on average. Travel is more expensive in London, whether you buy your own gas or use public transportation. Gas and electric is also more expensive in London, but internet is almost half the price of New York on average. Education is more expensive in New York, and it's thought that inner-city London schools are a bit better than inner-city New York schools. The average wage in New York is $4,542 a month, while in London it is only $2,952 a month.
Oh man, now I feel sorry for all the Londoners. Damn! You guys are outshiners in that department. But then, I guess, if you look at the 12th most expensive, the 5th most expensive, it's kind of like one of them, like, we get paid more, but it's more expensive. But damn, that is a big difference, man. A very big difference. Get yourself to New York if you're working in London, man. Get paid top dollar, man. Definitely.
That might sound bad for Londoners, but they do get free healthcare, lots of paid vacation, and in general, better workers' rights.
Very
true. Aside, what about the general day-to-day creature comforts? Well, as London is much bigger, it also has more space. With that, you get more parks and more green spaces. At the same time, New York is easier to get around, and some people speaking on forums say a bit more fun, as it's compact, and unlike London, is more of a 24-hour city. If you are out at night, London may have more crimes in terms of robberies and assaults, but New York has more murders. According to Numbeo, respondents to a survey said they felt similar about safety in London and New York. It seems the difference is bigger crimes are more common in New York, but your chances of finding trouble on the street is more likely in London. We should, however, take this to those that have lived in both cities. According to one American man who did both for many years, he said on a forum thread that both cities were too expensive even when single.
Joe, that sounds like my answer if I get asked. But yeah, London's way too expensive, and you're telling me New York's more expensive? They're both way too expensive, to be honest with you. Yeah, that'd be my answer.
Loved the open, sprawling green spaces in London, and at times didn't like the noisy, claustrophobic streets of New York. He did, however, like the fact that in New York, you could sit down anywhere and find enjoyment, while London was too spread out for him at times. The writer agreed with the sites we cited already on costs of things, also the heavy workload in the US for most people, but did say in terms of meeting new people, socializing, or partying, New York is easier. One more thing he pointed out that we didn't mention yet was the weather, which is a deal breaker for some people. New York has colder winters and can have steaming hot summers, whereas London is cool, damp, and gray for much of the year, with some warm weeks in summer and only a moderately cold winter compared to New York. We'll end it there with the weather. Have you lived in or visited either of these two cities?
Let me know if you have in the comments if you've lived or visited any. I'd really want to know your opinions on what you think's better. It kind of just, to me, seems like a very big toss-up. It's personal preference on what you think is more valuable than something else. Do you think the weather's more valuable than potentially not earning as much, but you're not spending as much? Or do you think, no, I don't care about the weather, I want that top dollar? You know what I mean? It's all personal preference. It was awesome to hear someone's opinion there. But again, it was very split. Like that of New York, that of London, that of New York, that of London. It was just, what do you prefer better? It's going to make your mind up at the end of the day. Let me know in the comments, guys, which one you'd prefer to live in. Your best quality about both, I'd seriously appreciate it. I will read it. Let me know in the comments, guys. Hit that like button. I definitely will be hitting it. So why don't you hit it, you know? Put a smile on my face. Put a smile on your face, because Not only do you hit the like button, it goes blue after, and why wouldn't that put a smile on your face? Hit that subscribe button as well, you absolute legends, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.